Have you ever felt that something in your life was off, but you couldn't find any real evidence? Like an invisible weight was hanging over you, but you couldn't pinpoint why? Everything seemed normal, even perfect. Morning kisses, warm hugs, shared dinners, conversations about the future. But deep inside, something whispered, "This is just the surface. Something is hiding behind this facade." This is the story of how I lost trust in the people I considered the closest in my life. People who weren't just part of my daily routine, but those to whom I opened my heart and shared my deepest thoughts. It's a story that started on an ordinary day, but ended in a way that turned everything I believed in upside down. But before I begin, let me just say this. It wasn't just betrayal. It was the destruction of everything I held true. I want to tell you how it all looked from the very beginning. It was an ordinary day, nothing unusual. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and I woke up as usual to start my day. Her smile was the first thing I saw that morning. She looked happy, calm, even a little mysterious. Her usual good morning, love sounded as warm as ever. Nothing seemed wrong. But then, in the depth of her eyes, I noticed something new. It was barely noticeable, almost imperceptible, but enough to plant a seed of doubt. I tried to dismiss it. I'm probably imagining things, I thought. We all see things that aren't there sometimes. But do you know that feeling? That unsettling, undefined feeling when something in your world seems out of place, but you can't quite figure out what? That's exactly how I felt that day. My day went on as usual. Work calls, a few meetings. But the thought of her gaze didn't leave my mind. Why did I feel like something had changed? Her phone calls, her smile, even the way she put on her coat to go for her evening jog seemed different. But again, I convinced myself it was just my imagination. After all, our relationship had always been strong. Our marriage always seemed unshakable. But that evening, my inner unease started to take shape. She said she was going to the gym as usual. "Don't wait up for me. I might be late," she said with the same smile that always made me trust her without question. But this time, something in her words felt insincere. That was the first crack in my illusion. And though I didn't know what lay ahead, that crack soon turned into a chasm. My story isn't about how everything fell apart in one moment. It's about how small details, small signs, gradually came together to form a picture that changed my life forever. Let me tell you everything from start to finish. Just be prepared, because the ending of this story will take your breath away. It all started with small details that seemed insignificant at first. She had always been active and loved sports, so her evening jogs and gym sessions never raised any suspicion. But over time, things changed. Her workouts became more frequent, longer, and she started coming home much later than usual. When I asked her why she was staying so late, she smiled and said, "I just want to work on myself, to stay in shape for both of us." Her words sounded sincere, and I tried not to dwell on it. But something in her behavior began to shift. She started spending much more time on her phone, always keeping it close. If it used to lie on the kitchen table or the nightstand, now it was always in her hands or her pocket. What puzzled me even more was that her phone was always on silent mode. That had never been typical for her. We had always openly shared our messages and calls, but now she had become overly cautious. Every time her phone rang or she got a message, she would quickly check the screen and lock it, as if she were afraid I might see something. It was a minor detail, but it gnawed at me. One evening, as we sat together on the couch, her phone suddenly buzzed. I glanced at the screen without meaning to and saw a name that made me freeze. It was my friend from the gym, someone I had been training with for years. At first, I thought it was just a coincidence or some random thing. But when I asked her why he was texting her, she quickly replied, "Oh, he was asking about your workouts. Nothing important." Her answer seemed a bit strange to me. Why was he texting her and not me? We had always communicated directly, and there had never been a reason to go through her. I try not to dwell on it, but it was already hard to ignore. Her behavior, those messages, it all seemed too suspicious. Then there were those evenings when she came home from her workouts looking not tired, but rather inspired. Her eyes sparkled, she was smiling, even a little happier than usual. I asked myself, is this because of the workouts? Or maybe something else? The suspicions began to pile up, and I couldn't ignore them anymore. Things took a turn for the worse when I noticed that her messages from my friend had become regular. Her phone buzzed in the morning, during the day, and even at night. I saw her trying to hide her smile while reading these messages and how quickly she deleted them. These small things, the long workouts, the hidden phone, the messages from my friend, started to form a picture. But I wasn't ready to accept the truth yet. I kept convincing myself that maybe I was overreacting, that it was just my imagination. But deep down, I already knew something wasn't right, and I had to find out what it was. One ordinary evening, I decided to finish work a bit earlier and head to the gym to surprise her. We used to work out together often, and I always enjoyed spending time with her. I thought it would be a pleasant surprise to see her during her workout, cheer her on, and maybe even go home together. When I walked into the gym, everything seemed normal. People were running on treadmills, lifting weights, trainers were instructing their clients. I scanned the gym, looking for her, and then I saw her in the far corner by the equipment. But she wasn't alone. He was standing next to her. My friend, a person I had known for years and trusted. They were laughing, exchanging jokes, and it looked so natural that I stopped in my tracks for a moment. They seemed so engrossed in their conversation that they didn't even notice I was there. I stood there, trying to find a logical explanation for what I was seeing. Maybe it's just a friendly chat, I thought. But the longer I watched, the more the details started to trouble me. Their laughter was too genuine, and their looks were more than friendly. I noticed how he lightly touched her hand, and she didn't pull away. On the contrary, she responded with a smile that seemed too warm, too personal. They looked so in sync, so comfortable with each other, that it began to bother me. Is this just friendship? I asked myself. Am I overreacting? Maybe they just get along well. After all, she has always been friendly, and he's someone I've known for years. Am I looking for a problem where there isn't one? But then I saw something that made me hold my breath. Their look. She looked at him in a way she hadn't looked at me in a long time. Her eyes were filled with tenderness, warmth, even admiration, and his gaze mirrored hers. This wasn't how friends look at each other. This was something more, something I couldn't and didn't want to accept. I stood there in the shadows, trying to calm myself. I thought, maybe it's just my insecurities. Maybe I'm imagining a problem that doesn't exist. But that moment, their laughter, their touches, their looks, it all struck me deeply. I could no longer convince myself that this was just friendship. I decided not to let them know I was there. I stayed in the background, watching them. The more I observed, the more questions flooded my mind. Why were they so close? Why did their interaction look like more than just a casual acquaintance at the gym? And most importantly, why did I feel like the ground was slipping out from under me? That evening, I went home earlier than planned. I couldn't bring myself to confront them or say anything. I was afraid that my suspicions might turn out to be true. And while I still didn't have any concrete evidence, this moment became another crack in my trust. She was supposed to be my partner, and he was supposed to be my friend. But something in their actions hinted that they were hiding something I didn't even want to think about. It was an ordinary evening, just like many others. We were sitting at home. I was scrolling through the news on my phone, and she was watching something on her laptop. Her phone, which she usually kept in her hands or tucked away in her pocket, was lying on the table next to her this time. It was a small detail I initially didn't pay much attention to, but now, looking back, I understand how important it was. When the screen of her phone lit up, I didn't plan to look at it. It was one of those accidental moments when your eyes fall on something, and you can't look away. On the screen was a message that I couldn't ignore. Just a few words, but they hit me like a bolt of lightning. Can't wait for tomorrow. You look amazing. My heart froze. I stared at those words, trying to comprehend what I was seeing. My mind went blank for a moment and then started racing, trying to find an explanation. Who wrote this? Why would they say that? What did it mean? And then I saw the sender's name. It was him, my friend from the gym, a person I had trusted for years, who had been a part of my life for so long that I couldn't even imagine he would betray me. But there it was, his name on the screen and those words that left no room for doubt. I sat in the chair, trying to collect my thoughts. A storm was raging in my mind. What does this mean? How long has this been going on? Is this a joke? Am I misinterpreting this message? I wanted to convince myself that this was some kind of misunderstanding, but the message was too explicit, too intimate. My heart started pounding faster, and I felt anxiety growing in my chest. She sat next to me, unaware, her attention completely absorbed by her laptop screen. I looked at her, trying to figure out if she knew what I had just seen. Her face was calm. She looked as if nothing had happened. I tried to stay composed, but it was incredibly hard. Should I ask her about it immediately? Should I tell her I saw it? But I realized it wasn't enough. One message wasn't enough to accuse her, though my heart already felt that this was just the tip of the iceberg. I pretended nothing had happened, but inside I was boiling. Every movement she made, every word she said now seemed suspicious. She laughed at something on her laptop, and that sound only intensified my doubts. How can she look so happy if she's betraying me? I wondered. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her phone lay next to her pillow, and I kept glancing at it as if expecting it to light up again. 1,000 questions raced through my mind. How long has this been going on? How did it start? Is there more I don't know? Each thought weighed heavily on my chest, like a stone crushing me. I realized that I needed to know the whole truth. That single message had become the spark that changed everything. I could no longer trust her words. I could no longer turn a blind eye to what was happening. This was the beginning of the end of the life I thought was perfect. And while I didn't yet know all the details, I already understood. The truth I was about to uncover could become the most painful blow of my life. After seeing that accidental message on her phone, I could no longer remain in the dark. My heart screamed that something was wrong, and I had to find out the truth. But how? How do you uncover betrayal when it seems like every effort is made to hide it? I decided to act smartly, cautiously, and discreetly. A plan was forming in my mind, one that felt like something out of a spy movie. First, I installed a camera at home. It was a small hidden camera that could be placed anywhere. I positioned it in our living room, where we spent most of our time together. I thought if there's something between them, it would inevitably show when they're together in the house. Next came our car. I placed another hidden camera inside. She often drove alone or said she was picking up a friend. Now, I had a way to see who got into our car and what conversations took place. I carefully concealed the device so she wouldn't suspect anything. But the most challenging part was the gym. I knew that was where they often saw each other, and if anything was happening, there was a good chance I'd find the truth there. I bought a small portable camera and arranged with one of the trainers I knew to discreetly place it in the gym. It had to be hidden but effective. That location became a key part of my investigation. When everything was set up, I felt a mix of fear and determination. I knew this could be the beginning of the end. If my suspicions were confirmed, it would shatter my life. But at the same time, I understood that I couldn't live a lie. I needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. Each night, after she went to bed, I sat in front of my screen, reviewing the recordings. I was tense. Every minute felt like an eternity. At first, nothing seemed suspicious. At home, she went about her usual routine, watching TV, reading, or talking on the phone. In the car, everything appeared perfectly normal. I began to think that maybe I was overreacting, that it was all in my head. But on the third day, everything changed. While reviewing footage from the gym camera, I saw them. They were sitting together after a workout, talking and laughing. Their lips were too intimate. Her hand accidentally touched his, and he didn't pull away. That moment felt unnatural to me, but I told myself, maybe it still doesn't mean anything. Later that evening, I saw her get into the car after the workout. And there, on the recording, I heard her talking to him. Their conversation seemed innocent at first glance. But her laughter, her tone, it was different. It wasn't how she usually spoke. I began to suspect that this was just the tip of the iceberg. Every day, I reviewed the recordings, as if hoping to find proof that my suspicions were unfounded. But with each new clip, it became increasingly obvious. Their conversations, their gestures, even the way she smiled when talking about him. It all seemed glaringly clear. My heart was breaking. I saw what I didn't want to see, but now I couldn't ignore it. It was hard, painful, but I knew this was just the beginning. Now I had evidence, but what was I supposed to do next? How could I confront both of them and make them answer for their actions? That question haunted me. But one thing was certain. I couldn't stay silent anymore. A few days later, I sat down, as always, to review the camera footage. At first, everything seemed routine. People leaving the gym, someone talking on the phone, others discussing their workouts. I was about to close the video when suddenly I saw them. She was walking alongside him. Their demeanor, their body language, it wasn't what I expected. They weren't just talking, they were laughing. And that laughter, it was different, intimate. I noticed how he looked at her, and how she looked back at him. That look, it was filled with warmth that had long since vanished from our relationship. They walked to his car, and like a gentleman, he opened the door for her. She got in, laughing, while he walked around to the driver's side. It all looked so natural, so effortless, as if it was their daily ritual. I paused the video and just stared at the screen. In that moment, I was overwhelmed with emotions. Anger, pain, disappointment. I tried to find excuses. Maybe it's just a friendly ride. Maybe it doesn't mean anything. But deep down, I already knew the answer. They looked too comfortable together. This wasn't just a gesture of courtesy. It was something more. I replayed the footage, trying to catch every detail. My mind painted the worst scenarios. Is this the first time? Have they done this before? I felt my chest tighten. A wave of emotions hit me that I couldn't even begin to describe. It wasn't just painful. It was like a blow that left me breathless. Later, as I watched the footage again, I began noticing details I had initially overlooked. How he touched her hand as she walked out of the gym. How she leaned in to whisper something to him. And how they both laughed. None of it looked like just friendship. It was the kind of connection you can't hide, even if you try. That night, my mind was racing with 1,000 questions. How long has this been going on? Why didn't I notice earlier? What else are they hiding from me? Every potential answer only deepened the pain. Everything I once considered safe and stable now felt shaky and fragile. That recording wasn't just evidence. It was the beginning of the end. It opened the door to a truth I had been trying to ignore for far too long. But along with that video came a realization. I couldn't postpone this any longer. I couldn't keep convincing myself that everything was fine. I had to act. I needed to find all the answers, even if it shattered me completely. I closed the laptop and sat in silence. My mind was overwhelmed with emotions, but at the same time, I felt an eerie calmness. There were no more doubts. This wasn't just my imagination or an overreaction. This was reality, and it was far worse than anything I could have imagined. But now I knew I had to put together every piece of this horrifying puzzle to finally close this chapter and move on. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying the footage in my mind, analyzing every scene and every detail. I didn't know how to proceed, but one thing was clear. I could no longer ignore what was unfolding before my eyes. I resolved to uncover the full truth, even if it meant destroying whatever remained of my former life. The next day, I decided it was time to find out the truth. I took a day off work, telling my wife that I had errands to run in the city, and left the house early in the morning. In reality, I parked nearby, hiding in my car to observe what was happening. I had one goal: to connect to the cameras in real time and confirm whether my suspicions were true. Hours dragged on endlessly. I sat in my car, adrenaline coursing through my veins. My hands trembled as I opened my laptop and connected to the surveillance system. The cameras displayed clear footage of our house, the living room, the kitchen. At first, everything was quiet. She left the house, likely for the gym, while I sat anxiously waiting. I tried to calm myself, but the fire inside me was burning. About an hour later, I saw her return home, but she wasn't alone. He was with her. My friend, the man I considered a brother, walked into my house as if it were his own. Her face was full of joy, and his smile was all too familiar. It felt like a ritual, something they had done many times before. That realization hit me the hardest. Could this not be the first time? They sat on the living room couch, close to each other. At first, they just talked, laughed, and shared jokes. But their body language betrayed them. She leaned closer to him than necessary. Her hand brushed against his shoulder, and he placed his hand on her knee. My heart clenched. These weren't just friendly gestures. This was something deeper, something they were clearly trying to hide from me. My eyes were glued to the screen, unable to believe what I was seeing. My mind refused to accept it, but the footage told its own story. This wasn't a scene between two friends. It was a scene between two people who obviously felt something more than they were willing to admit. I felt everything around me start to fade. Their laughter, their gestures, the way she looked at him. It was too much. My head spun, and for a moment I thought I might pass out. How could they do this to me? How could she bring him into our home, the place we built together, knowing it was my space, my sanctuary? I continued to watch for a few more minutes. They didn't do anything overtly incriminating, but every little detail, every movement, every glance was filled with a hidden intimacy. This wasn't the kind of interaction I expected to see between them. They were so at ease with each other that it was terrifying. I realized this wasn't a one-time mistake or a coincidence. This was something they had been cultivating behind my back. In that moment, I felt anger boiling inside me. I wanted to burst out of the car, storm into the house, and end everything right there. But something held me back. I knew I needed the full truth. I had to see this through to the end so that there would be no lingering doubts later. I stayed in place, continuing to observe. They sat together for a while longer, talking and laughing as if there was nothing wrong in their world. She looked happy, happier than I'd seen her in a long time. And that hurt the most. That happiness, which should have been ours, now belonged to someone else. When they finally stood up, I saw him hug her. It wasn't just a friendly hug. It was a gesture of closeness, a gesture I couldn't tolerate. I closed the laptop and sat in my car, trying to breathe. Everything I knew had been destroyed in those few minutes. But now I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I had to act, and I had to act now. This was the moment I decided I couldn't wait any longer. Everything inside me screamed, "Do it now!" My heart was pounding so loudly, it felt like even they could hear it. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the house. Each step felt like an eternity. My thoughts were chaotic, but I knew one thing. This time, I would get the answers. I opened the door, and the first thing I saw was their faces. They were sitting on the couch, and their conversation stopped the moment they noticed me. Her face turned as pale as chalk, and she looked like she was about to faint. "He, my friend," Looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. His smile vanished, and he froze as if caught red-handed. I closed the door behind me, slowly walked toward them, and spoke in a cold, even tone. "What are you two doing here?" Her eyes darted around, searching for an escape. She began to speak, but her voice trembled. This isn't what you think. Not what I think." I interrupted, my words striking like a hammer. "Are you serious? I saw you. I saw everything." He finally spoke, his voice weak, almost a whisper. "Listen, this is just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" My voice rose. "You call this a misunderstanding? How long has this been going on? How could you both do this to me?" Tears began streaming down her face. She clenched her hands in a fist as if trying to collect her thoughts. "It was a mistake," she said through her sobs. "It doesn't mean anything. I love you." "A mistake?" I laughed bitterly, a laugh filled with sarcasm. "A mistake is forgetting a birthday. But this is not a mistake. This is betrayal. You both betrayed me." He sat there, silently, his head hung low. His hands trembled, and I could see him struggling to find words of justification, but he said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any words could. I turned to him, full of anger. "You were like a brother to me. I trusted you more than anyone. And what did you do? You came into my home, behind my back, and destroyed everything. How could you?" He raised his head, his eyes filled with shame. "I don't know what to say. I never wanted this to happen." "You never wanted it?" I shouted. "Then why did you do it? Why did you keep coming here, knowing this would destroy everything?" She began crying harder, grabbing my hand. "Please listen to me. It was a mistake. I'm sorry. We can fix this. We can start over." I pulled my hand away and looked at her. Her tears, her words, they no longer had any power over me. They were hollow, just like her promises. I said quietly but firmly, "There is no starting over. You both made your choice, and now you have to live with the consequences." I looked at them one last time, feeling my anger slowly give way to emptiness. These were two people I once loved and trusted more than anything. But now, they were nothing more than a reminder of a betrayal I would never forget. "You'd better leave," I said, turning to the door. "And don't come back." I left them sitting there in silence, a silence more oppressive than any words. At that moment, I felt everything I once knew crumble around me. But I also felt something else. This was the beginning of my new life, one where they no longer had a place. This was the moment I had dreaded, but I knew it was inevitable. After what had happened, there was nothing left to salvage. No trust, no respect, no sense of closeness that had once bound us together. I stood in the living room, looking at them both, knowing this was the end. I turned to her and said calmly but firmly, "You need to pack your things and leave. This is no longer your home." She froze, as if she couldn't comprehend what I had just said. Her face was wet with tears, her expression pleading. She began to say something, but the words came out broken, nearly unintelligible. "Please give me a chance. We can fix this. I'm sorry for everything." "A chance?" I interrupted, looking directly into her eyes. "You had your chance, and you used it to betray me. How can you ask for another chance when your actions speak louder than any words?" She lowered her head, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She knew no words could fix this. I pointed toward the bedroom. "You have some time to pack your things. I don't want to see you here anymore." She slowly walked to the room, leaving me alone with him. My friend, my brother, someone I had known for most of my life, stood in the corner of the room, avoiding my gaze. His hands were shoved into his pockets, and he looked like he wanted to disappear. But I wasn't going to let him leave without saying something. "And you?" I addressed him. "Do you have anything to say?" He lifted his head but couldn't meet my eyes. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. No, I don't know what to say. You don't know what to say? I repeated, laughing bitterly. You betrayed me. You betrayed our friendship, destroyed everything we had. And now you're saying you don't know what to say? He remained silent. His silence spoke louder than any words. It was a silence of shame, a silence that acknowledged his guilt. He knew no excuse could undo what had happened. I no longer had the strength to listen or talk to him.